evening, everyone. Welcome to Family Values Alliance Ballarat's presentation, LGBTQI Myths and Facts. So tonight we're going to be looking at a number of myths and facts that are out there. What you hear tonight won't be what you hear every day, and there's a reason for that. There's actually a real push to squash a lot of the scientific evidence and a lot of the facts around LGBTQI issues. And so tonight I want to actually dispel some of those myths and give you some things that you actually won't hear very often. I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to let me know if you think it's a myth or if you think it's a fact or somewhere in between. There are a few that might be somewhere in between, okay? So my first question is, homosexuality is innate and unchangeable. Myth or fact?
Myth.
Myth. Well done. It is a myth. Good job. There has never been a gay gene found. Now, I need to say that again very clearly. There has never been a gay gene found. It was once published in a magazine that there was, however this was false. Studies of identical twins have proven it is not biological. Identical twins have the same genes, and anything that is biological will exist 100% of the time. Studies with twins, identical twins, from 2000 to 2011, there were 6 studies and they showed a result of 11% for men and 14% for women. So this actually proved that it's not biological, not genetic. The American Psychological Association, a very pro-gay organisation, states there is no consensus among scientists about the exact reasons that an individual develops a heterosexual, bisexual, gay or lesbian orientation. Although much research has examined the possible genetic, hormonal, developmental, social and cultural influences on sexual orientation, no findings have emerged that permit scientists to conclude that sexual orientation is determined by any particular factor or factors. There is zero evidence that it is innate, biological. There is also no evidence that it is unchangeable. Quite the contrary. In fact, many good people have changed and testify to this. Dr. Lisa Diamond, lesbian activist in the American Psychological Association, writes, now this might be a bit difficult to follow, but I'll explain it a little more clearly after. This is in their scientific terms. Directly contrary to the conventional wisdom that individuals with exclusive same-sex attractions represent the prototypical type of sexual minority individual, and that those with bisexual patterns of attraction are indisputably the norm, and those with exclusive same-sex attraction also already experience opposite-sex attraction. Okay, that was a mouthful. In simple terms, what this means is that homosexual desire is not hardwired and that born that way and can't change is a myth. James Parker, former gay activist, walked away from the homosexual lifestyle. He reports that he was actually quite amazed when he started to experience attraction for the opposite sex because he was told that could never happen, but it did. Those who change rarely talk publicly about this as they suffer bullying from the LGBTQI community for sharing their life experience. There is also media bias that tends to ignore such stories and highlight other stories. Research done by Stephen Black, head of First Stone Ministries, provides scientific evidence that a high percent of people can and do change. It's been reported in the West today that 98% of today's teens who believe they are homosexual at 16 will believe 1 year later that they are heterosexual. It is irresponsible to offer gay affirmative counselling to teens on the grounds that the homosexual orientation is intrinsic and fixed, when this is simply not the case. The next one we have is the differences between boys and girls are a social construct. Myth or fact?
Myth.
Myth. That's right. That is a myth. It is not a social construct. This is propaganda that has been made up to support the transgender agenda. There are very real biological differences between boys and girls, between men and women. I was given a book to read by a friend, Why Gender Matters, and I'm actually quite interested because there's so many differences that I wasn't even aware of. Things to do with the way that we hear differently, the way that we interact differently. We are intrinsically different. Political correctness is seeking to erase male and female. I saw a cartoon in a presentation recently. It was of a boy who believes they are a girl, and in the cartoon they state, I have a girl's penis. Because I feel like a girl, then my penis must be a girl's penis. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. If you think gender congruence is good, identifying with your biological sex, then you see transgender as less good, and that makes you transphobic. Where did the idea come from that male and female is a social construct? Dr. John Money had this theory, and he was presenting this theory on television. A parent whose unfortunate twin son had a botched circumcision heard this theory, and she actually thought, this will solve my son's problem. My poor son will never be happy as a boy since he no longer has a penis because of this botched circumcision. And so she went to Dr. Money for his help. This case was known as the John Joan case. Poor little David became Brenda. That his initial name was Bruce or Brian. I'm not sure, I get the two twins mixed up. So his brother and he were ideal because we have a boy and another boy who's been socially conditioned to be a girl. His parents were told, do not let him know that he is a boy biologically. Treat him like a girl in every way. And so they did. No, you don't need to shave. You're a girl. Girls don't shave. Consistently and constantly, this little boy was given messages that his gender was really that of a female. Dr. Money, who actually had complete control of reporting the evidence of this case, reported for 20 years that this was going very well, that this boy transitioned very well into Joan, the pseudonym for David Reimer, as his end name was. And for 20 years, lots of different policies were formed around the success of this case. In fact, it was an utter failure. Poor David Reimer didn't cope well, had huge issues, and it's a really sad story. You need to look it up, but in the end, both David's twin brother and David suicide. It's a really shocking case. And this fraud is still held, the research is still held to be true today, even though Dr. Money has been proven to be a fraud in what he claimed. And that's where the basis of gender, male and female, as a social construct actually comes from. Homosexual men, on average, have a shorter lifespan than heterosexual men. Myth or fact? Fact. You are right, it is a fact. Homosexual men, because of many reasons, have shorter lifespans. Two of the main reasons that are talked about are HIV infections and elevated suicidal risks. A study published in June 1997 in the International Journal of Epidemiology, conducted by researchers at the British Columbia Centre for Excellence in HIV and AIDS, found that life expectancy at the age 20 among gay and bisexual men in Vancouver was 8 to 21 years shorter than that of all men in the Canadian city. The researchers, unhappy that this is being used by conservatives, claim that circumstances have changed and that if they were to repeat the study it would be greatly improved. They did not, however, conduct a new study. So those are the latest figures that have been fully researched. Anal sex is unhealthy. Myth or fact?
Fact.
Fact. You're such a knowledgeable audience here tonight. Yes, it is fact. So far you're doing very well. Okay, the rectum, forgive me for my bluntness here, is made to be an exit, not an entrance. The tissue inside the anus is not as well protected. It is thinner and so vulnerable to tearing and the spread of infection. Most STIs are transferable through the anus. Chlamydia, gonorrhea, infectious hepatitis and HIV. It can lead to weakening of the anal sphincter, a ring-like muscle that tightens after we defecate. It can lead to fecal incontinence. Other health risks include genital herpes, genital warts and syphilis. One person I know told me that they had 3 types of anal cancer because of having lived the homosexual lifestyle. It is reckless and a lack of our duty of care to young people to teach anal sex without teaching all of the risks. And yet that is what is being done across society today. The next one, gender dysphoria is a mental illness. Myth or fact?
Fact.
Correct. That is a fact. I brought my DSM-5 here just for anyone who wants to dispute that fact. This is from the American Psychiatric Association, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders. And if you turn to page 451, you will see gender dysphoria listed here. There is actually a push to remove gender dysphoria from the diagnostic manual. Oh, no, that's not really a mental illness. There's a push to remove it. If you look at what the symptoms of gender dysphoria are, you will see it fits perfectly with many other mental health disorders. Similar criteria to any disorder where you consistently and persistently believe something that is not true. Someone is consistently and persistently believing in something not true. We call that delusional. HIV, AIDS, is primarily a disease of homosexual men. Myth, fact, or somewhere in between?
Fact.
Yes, another fact. Okay. According to HIV Media Guide, in Australia, HIV transmission continues to occur primarily through sexual contact between men. In 2015, 68% of transmission occurred among men who have sex with men. A further 5% attributed to either male-to-male sex or injecting drug use. Interesting. So we're not going to say 73% because some of them inject drugs, so maybe it's 68 and we'll put that 5 towards injecting drug use. I actually was speaking to a friend who's a nurse, and they nursed a lot of AIDS patients actually when people were very fearful of people with AIDS because they didn't yet know much about it. And it came out that AIDS was caused through homosexual sex, through prostitutes, people who had drug injections and blood transfusions. And what my friend who is the nurse said to me was that the majority of those that were prostitutes were actually male prostitutes, and the majority of those that were drug infected were people who were also homosexual. So it's like they were trying to hide that it's a homosexual disease by saying, well, they're a prostitute, let's not talk about the fact that they're also homosexual. They're a drug user, let's not talk about the fact that they're also homosexual. If it weren't such a high risk, why would we be paying $800 per month to subsidise homosexual men for taking the drug PrEP? That's right. Listed on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, most of the cost for this is paid by our tax dollars. I read a report that said about half of homosexual men in Australia are now successfully inducted into that drug program. Wow, there's a big money for pharmaceutical companies from this drug. The next one. Homosexuality is caused by environmental factors. Myth, fact, or somewhere in between? I'm going to go with somewhere in between. We can't ignore the fact that our upbringing, maybe we'll put the somewhere in betweens up on that corner there. We can't ignore the fact that our upbringing and environment have profound effects on us. I've heard many talk about how, as they went through healing from emotional wounds, their attractions changed. They didn't receive the affirmation or affection that they needed from their parents to form a healthy view of themselves. Camilla Paglia, lesbian feminist and academic, said every single gay person I know has some sort of drama going on back in childhood. Something was happening that we're not allowed to ask about anymore. So we can't talk about those environmental factors anymore. It's not politically correct. I heard about a young boy, we'll call him Andy. Andy actually felt like he was a girl in a boy's body. He started to feel like he was a girl. Now this was quite a long time ago, before we had the policy that, well, then we must affirm that and put them straight into socially transitioning. So Andy was referred to someone who did family therapy. They discovered when Andy was 3, his sister was born who had a disability. Andy felt like, Mum and Dad love my sister, but they don't love me. If I was a girl, Mum and Dad would love me. He said in the course of therapy, you would love me if I was a girl. They found out that actually the root cause of Andy's dysphoria was not because he had a boy's brain in a girl's body, it was because he had emotional trauma. Not uncommon. Okay, the next one is your sex is assigned at birth. When the doctor says you're a boy or a girl, that's when your sex is assigned. Myth or fact? Correct. That is a myth. Your sex is not assigned at birth by the doctor. Your sex is assigned by your biology in the womb from conception. You are biologically male or female. Anything else is a myth. You can be born with a girl's brain in a boy's body. Myth or fact? Yes, absolute myth. Endocrinologist Michael Laidlaw was asked to review the book I Am Jazz. He writes about the facts. As to Jazz having a girl brain, consider what does the brain comprise. There are billions of neurons that make up this magnificent structure. Neurons are very specialized cells that transmit and store information. The control center, if you will, of every cell in the body is nucleus, which contains DNA. The DNA is wound up into specialized units called chromosomes. There are 46 chromosomes in every human cell. 2 of these are specialized chromosomes called sex chromosomes. Assuming normal development, females have 2 X chromosomes and males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. These sex chromosomes are present in every cell in the body. They remain in the cells from conception until death and do not change. It follows from this that since Jazz is male, every cell in his brain has an X and a Y chromosome, whereas a girl brain would have 2 X chromosomes. Therefore, Jazz in fact has a boy brain right down to the very level of the DNA. So to say there is a boy's brain in a girl's body or a girl's brain in a boy's body is scientifically inaccurate. There is no evidence to support this claim. Homosexuals are more promiscuous than heterosexuals. Myth or fact?
Fact.
Yes, that is indeed a fact. Douglas T. Kendrick writes, homosexual men are famously promiscuous, a fact that became well known with the onset of AIDS, when studies of gay men who were HIV positive revealed average numbers of partners in the hundreds, and even though gay men who were HIV negative had much lower numbers, the average for them was still dramatically higher than the average numbers for heterosexual men. Dr. Hewitt wrote in the Journal of Sex Research, gay liberation in the 1970s was accompanied by an explosion of gay sexuality, especially in tolerant cities such as Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, where gays concentrated. By their own reports, many men had large numbers of sexual partners annually, often numbering in the hundreds and even in the thousands. Frenetic, casual, and anonymous sex was widespread among homosexual and bisexual men. I've heard of some recent research where they said even a man who believes to be in a monogamous, stable relationship, the average would still have 2 other sexual partners in that year. You are causing suicides if you don't allow children to transition early. Myth or fact?
Myth.
Yes, that is indeed another myth. Now, I want to say I take suicide very seriously. Having lost a younger brother to suicide, I know the pain and the devastation that suicide brings to a family and a community. I have spent a lot of time working in suicide prevention. However, in my opinion, this statement is a highly emotive statement used to shut down healthy debate. A growing online community of gay-affirming physicians, mental health professionals, and academics with a webpage, First Do No Harm, youth trans critical professionals, write, we are concerned about the current trend to quickly diagnose and affirm young people as transgender, often setting them down a path towards medical transition. We feel that unnecessary surgeries and or hormonal treatments, which have not been proven safe in the long term, represent significant risks for young people. It is well known that a minimum of 80% of children who are left alone will be naturally comfortable in their birth sex in adulthood. A minimum of 80% will be happy in their birth sex. So if a minimum of 80% will be happy in their birth sex, why would you affirm transition, radical treatments, and all of the evidence says that people who transition still have exceptionally high suicide rates? Therefore, you're actually increasing the suicide rate by affirming children as transgenders. You're not decreasing it, you're actually increasing suicide rates. There are no studies that show the cause of suicides for transgender people. There is assumption that has been said. If you say something often enough, long enough, even if it's a complete myth, people will start to believe it. The American College of Pediatricians state rates of suicide are nearly 20 times greater among adults who use cross-sex hormones and undergo sex reassignment surgery. Even in Sweden, which is amongst the most LGBTQ affirming countries. What compassionate and reasonable person would condemn young children to this fate, knowing that after puberty as many as 88% of girls and 98% of boys will eventually accept reality and achieve a state of mental and physical health? They also argue that conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful is child abuse. I just want to share one other experience that I saw around this, and that was yesterday. It came to my attention, a case from 2013, and the person's name was Nancy Heist, claimed unbearable psychological suffering and was killed by euthanasia because she felt like the sex change operation to turn her into a man resulted in a monster. There is no question she had childhood trauma. She states, "I was the girl that nobody wanted. While my brothers were celebrated, I got a storage room above the garage as a bedroom. If only you had been a boy," my mother complained. "I was tolerated, nothing more." Responding to her death, her mother said, "When I saw Nancy for the first time, my dream was shattered. She was so ugly. I had a phantom birth. Her death does not bother me." So you can see how underlying trauma is so prevalent once you start to go into the stories of young people. And if you look up detransitioners on the internet, you'll hear a lot of sad stories of young people. One person, I remember them stating, you know, "I have a scarred chest. Can't take away that I no longer have my breasts. They've been gone forever because I bought into the lie." The next one, men who have sex with men have higher rates of STDs. Myth or fact? Yeah, it is a fact. Syphilis, once almost eliminated in the USA, has been reported to be increasing, especially among gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. In 2016, 80.6% of infections were for men having sex with men. So less than 3% of the population accounted for 80% of infections. This is true for all sexually transmitted diseases. The prevalence is higher among men who have sex with men. All of the research will show this. Okay, myth or fact? 10% of the population are LGBTQI.
Myth.
Correct, it is a myth. Again, if you say something often enough, long enough, people start to believe it. You often hear that figure bandied around. Numerous surveys in many countries show that the LGBTQI community make up about 3% of the population. Gallup US report from March 20, 2015 reported that in San Francisco there was 6.2%, the highest in the USA. Given the long history of visibility as well as the politically active LGBT community, this is not surprising. 10% is commonly cited and really comes from data by Alfred Kinsey, who used a high percentage of pedophiles and prisoners in his research, not your general population. The next one, homosexual homosexuality results from sexual abuse? I'm going to put it into the somewhere in between. Not all gay men were molested as boys, and not all boys who are molested turn out gay. However, it cannot be denied that a disproportionately high number of gay men were abused as boys, and this certainly contributed to their sexual and emotional development. Early exposure to pornography has also been known to be a factor. Some of the people who've talked about childhood abuse are out and proud gay men, such as Milo Yiannopoulos, Anderson Cooper, George Takei, and Don Lemon. It is considered taboo to connect childhood sexual abuse with subsequent gay identity, since it contradicts the born gay myth, and it would underscore the fact that homosexual attractions are not natural and positive. A 2009 report prepared for a bisexual health summit revealed that 74% of bisexuals had been sexually abused as children. Christian gay rights activist Matt Vine states, "I think it's harmful to gay Christians to ask them to basically avoid any kind of romantic intimacy for their entire life because their sexuality is irredeemably broken." So this is a gay rights activist talking about your sexuality being irredeemably broken. Your gender is fluid. I can be a girl today, I can be a boy tomorrow. It depends on my inner feeling, what I identify within myself. Myth or fact?
Myth.
Correct. That is a myth. Somebody said, gender exists between your ears, not your legs. Okay, that's a myth. Gender was first accepted as a word for its sex, for male or female. It's now used to describe how one feels about themselves. Feelings are not facts. It's well known that mistaking feelings for facts causes distress. It's one of the top 10 thinking distortions talked about in mental health, that mistaking feelings for facts creates mental distress. Sexuality and gender lie on a spectrum rather than falling within rigid categories. So I can be 80% female and 20% male, for example.
Myth.
Myth. Yes, that is indeed a myth. I heard just this week about a teaching in Queensland schools, the genderbread person, a resource to teach children that their gender changes from day to day, even from outfit to outfit. Wearing a tracksuit is a male trait. So therefore, if I'm wearing a tracksuit, that's going to tell me that I'm partially male, right? A female shoveling food into your mouth is seen as male. Skipping, prowling and worrying over what you will wear are more female types. So if you're doing any of those things, you must be partially female. You can see how confusing this is for kids. Because I'm wearing a tracksuit, I'm part male. Designed to make us believe we are all on a spectrum and neither fully male or fully female. There may be some general characteristics that are male and female. That doesn't mean that I'm no longer fully female if I show a little bit of a characteristic that might be seen as more manly. It's okay for me if I liked sports car, I don't particularly, but if I did, I could still be a female and enjoy sports cars. I know people who are very feminine who love sports cars. I know women who drive trucks, seen as predominantly a male thing. Doesn't make you a male just because you do something that is seen as more of a male occupation when you're a female. I was facilitating a training with a male. And we do have some genuine differences, and that's okay to have those genuine differences. I said to the guys who were kind of way back, seated further away, why don't you come in a little closer? They obediently started to move closer, and then my male co-facilitator said, no, guys, you can stay where you are. And he turned to me and he said, guys like their space. I'm like, they were coming closer, and one of the guys said, yeah, that's because we're married. We know we have to obey women when they tell us to do something. But it just, to me, was highlighting we do have some natural differences, and that's okay. Some things that we would perceive differently. But whether we do something one way or another doesn't make us male or female. There is no connection between paedophilia and the gay movement. Myth or fact? No connection between paedophilia and the gay movement.
Myth. Myth.
Yes, that is indeed a myth. NAMBLA, have you heard of North American Man-Boy Love Association? It formed in 1978 and exists to this day. Man-boy love. You're going to tell me that that's no association with pedophilia? They state, it's the love of a man for a boy and a boy for a man. Enjoyable, consensual, beautiful. Their goal is to end the extreme oppression of men and boys in mutually consensual relationships. Now, I would argue that 13-year-olds don't know how to consent to a 20-year-old mutually. That they don't actually know what they're consenting to, when a 20-year-old will come to a 13-year-old who probably has a father wound because they know how to pick out a young boy that has some kind of a wound and needs some love and attention. They don't know what they're actually consenting to. Dr. Judith Reisman has written some excellent work around what is happening in these areas. One of her works is called Crafting by Homosexual Youth. I highly recommend you look this up on the internet. It's very informative. One of the other things that is happening is the change of pedophiles in name to minor attracted persons, MAPS. It's our sexual orientation. We can't help it. So they are trying to use the same strategy that was used by the gay movement. It's my orientation. I was born that way. I can't help it. I'm a minor attracted person. I was born that way. I can't help it. To say there is no connection actually denies the facts. Children do best with their biological mother and father. Myth or fact? Fact. Yes, it is indeed a fact. Very controversial one now. Mr. Lopez reported he and other gay children feel pain because there's a missing biological parent. Katie Forst writes, it wasn't until I had children of my own that the wholeness of worth of having both mum and dad raising their children together hit me like a freight train. My kids need both of us, and marriage laws should always encourage and promote that ideal of mothers and fathers parenting their children together. We're not talking about same-sex parenting. There is strong agreement that non-biological parents tend to be more transitory, invest less time and energy and resources into kids, and be more dangerous to kids. I know I certainly felt with my stepdad that I wasn't loved and really valued. And I think that's a common experience of children who live with a step-parent or someone other than their biological parent. It's also commonly agreed that any time there is trauma, a child losing a parent, that trauma can affect a child in the long term. I remember meeting one young girl who was a child of a sperm donor. Her mother was a lesbian, and this child had depression. She had a deep father wound because she couldn't know who her dad was, and she really wanted to know who her dad was. It was part of her identity. very understandable. It's also agreed that men and women parent differently and they offer distinct and complementary gifts to their kids. All of this is agreed until you start to talk about gay parenting. And then, no, that's not true. Children from fatherless homes make up 63% of youth suicides. They make up 90% of homeless runaway children, 85% of children who show behaviour disorders, 80% of rapists with anger problems come from fatherless homes, 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, twice as likely to drop out of school. 75% of adolescent patients in chemical abuse centres come from fatherless homes, and 70% of youth in state-operated institutions. 85% of all youth in prisons come from fatherless homes. You may hear that there are studies that show that there is no difference. These studies are contested as they have methodological flaws. You are homophobic if you don't agree with gay marriage. Myth. That's correct. It is a myth. There are many reasons for people not agreeing with same-sex marriage. People who genuinely care about children's rights for a biological mother and father, for example. Or those that are concerned about sexual education in schools, promoting anal sex and other increased health risks associated with the LGBTQI life. Also, the concern around gender fluidity teaching and the acceleration that that has. So there are many reasons why people oppose homosexual marriage, and it's not because of discrimination, it's because of genuine concern for children and other things within society. Homosexuality is a choice, myth or fact? Fact.
Fact. Yeah.
I'm going to put it somewhere in between. People don't actually choose their attractions. They can choose whether or not to act on those attractions. You've probably heard it said, why would I choose to be gay? And I would say up until 20 years ago, that was probably pretty true as far as a conscious choice. I would say now, because it's currently packaged to young people as fun and trendy, that I'm certain some now choose it for that reason, that it's seen as fun and trendy. So I think we actually are moving towards it being a choice in society. Homosexuals commit higher rates of child molestations than heterosexuals. Myth or fact?
Fact.
Yes, sadly this is also a fact. The Lantern Project, supporting victims of child abuse, write, "The circle of child abuse is the tragic legacy of the attempts by homosexuals to legitimise having sex with boys. For too many boys, it is already too late to protect them from those who took advantage of their need for love and attention. All too many later perpetrate the abuse by themselves engaging in the sexual abuse of boys. Only by exposing the lies, insincere denials and deceptions, including those wrapped in scholastic garb of those who prey sexually on children, can we hope to build a wall of protection around the helpless children among us." Dr. Judith Reisman writes, "Research clearly identifies the percentage of child molesters among homosexual and bisexual males as significantly higher than among homosexuals. It is reported that 151 homosexual offenders assaulted 22,981 boys between them. 224 heterosexual offenders assaulted 4,435 girls between them." So the prevalence was lower. It's still horrific. Still horrific. Pastor Scott writes, "When I was about 14 or 15, I spent an afternoon smoking pot with a gay guy in his 20s who explained that young people during puberty have a very fluid sexual identity and how easy it had been for him to turn young teen boys into sex partners. A confirming study I later saw said 25% of youngsters suffer same-sex confusion, but most grow out of it naturally by the end of adolescence." I hear during adolescence is the worst time to be making decisions about your sexual identity. Ex-gay Robert Lopez states, "In a society soaked in porn, where sexual orientation is discussed openly in front of small children, there will certainly be 12 and 13-year-olds who think they want sex and think they are ready for it. When we discuss gay identity with 6th graders, which is very common, what are we discussing? We are talking about sexual acts. Perhaps people need to stand up and resist the human rights campaign's recent push to force such curricula on elementary and middle schools." So we come to the end of the myths and facts. I will be staying around to chat afterwards, so if you've got any questions, you can feel free to ask those afterwards. But thank you so much for coming to this evening's presentation.